Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Enjoy listening. Adventures of the Randy Elfmaid Book 1. You be careful, Devessa. Oh, Mom, where's your sense of adventure? I said, sassily flipping my long braid back over my shoulder. My mother, High Lady of the Emerald Forest, was not amused. You'd think after 1,000 years of rule someone would have yanked that stick out of her, but instead, she fixed me with her legendary look of disapproval. If you can't take this mission seriously, young lady, then I'll find someone else, she said, blue eyes intent, judging. The way she flipped her long, brown hair back over her shoulder, mimicking my little sass, told me just how annoyed Mom was at that moment. I might only be 100, but I've been around long enough to know when to shut up and behave. My mother might look like a tall, delicate elfin beauty, but she was hard as iron nails. Pulling my most sober and determined look about myself, I stood tall, looked her in the eye, and nodded. I'm sorry, I said. You know me, pre-fight jitters make me tell dumb jokes, but I've double-checked everything. I've made this flight a dozen times. I'll be fine. Mom relaxed, confident I was taking all precautions and would perform my duties in a manner befitting a princess of the Emerald Forest. Yeah, I had her fooled. Mom believed what she wanted to believe about me. If she knew the truth, I'd never be allowed to leave the house, much less travel between the elfin realms. My dire hawk let out a piercing cry, eager to take flight. A shiver raced up my body. I lived for these trips. Flying was thrilling, and the elfin boys in the Azure Mountains were tall, lean, and so much fun to play with. And the trip there would be long and quite interesting. Just remember, I'm a grown woman. I command a squadron of direhawks in the army, I said. She frowned at me. Some women didn't know when to let go of their children. I know what I'm doing. I've been flying alone between the elfin realms for decades. I know, she said. You are definitely old enough to know better, but you're still young enough to do something foolish anyway. I had to think about that one a moment. You make my head hurt sometimes, I said. I have to go. The giant saddlebird I was given to fly wasn't my preferred mount, but a courier bird bred for speed and endurance. This wasn't my first trip to the Azure Mountains. I've flown messages to all of the elfin realms, as had the sons and daughters of those nations' rulers. It was the elfin rulers' way of getting their children to know each other, and eventually pair off as ruling couples. We were in the lower branches of a mighty elfin oak. That particular tree was being used as a direhawkery, so I could see dozens of the giant hawks perched on the thick branches. The branch I was standing on was 5 times thicker than my body, but with just the one bird on it. My mother stood on the deck off the flight commander's house. We were about 100 feet above the ground. The capital of the Emerald Forest had only a handful of structures on the ground, mostly to tend to the human traders who passed through. All of the elves lived in elaborate and brightly painted treehouses. The High Lady's residence was in the very middle of the city, in the tallest elfin oak. We were at the edge of the city. Mom couldn't come out on the limb, since she was in full High Lady finery, flowing silk gown in numerous shades of green, exquisitely wrought silver and gold jewelry, and sky-high stiletto heels. Yeah, we make sacrifices for fashion. We looked enough alike to be confused for sisters, though my hair was black like my father's. Our bodies were athletic, but with some sweet curves. As elves, we were about twice as strong as a human, pound for pound. I was dressed for flight, soft suede leather shirt and pants, with soft-soled lace-up boots, and my long, black hair twisted in a thick braid down to my waist. There was a heavy coat and hood tied behind the direhawk's saddle, since it would get cold during the flight. I walked out to the bird, ensuring my saddlebags were attached to the saddle. It was mostly clothes for daily wear at the Azure Court, though I had a small wardrobe of formal wear in each of the elfin realms since I visited so often. There were rations, too, but I'd pick up better food in human settlements along the way. My mother, of course, could never know I did that. By your leave, I said, bowing formally to my mother and sovereign ruler. You have my leave, Devesa, Mom said. Be careful. Watch out for goblins and orcs. Stay away from all human settlements. I centered myself and envisioned lifting up into the air and moving to the saddle. A second later, the warm tingle of magic flowed through my body, and I felt weightless. Slowly lifting off the thick limb, I floated up and over to the direhawk saddle. Spreading my legs, I gently settled into the leather saddle. I slanted a look at my mother, who looked quite proud. I was barely 100, but my magic abilities were already beginning to manifest. Though I was cool outwardly, inside I felt tired and spent. It wasn't easy channeling power. I couldn't wait until I reached my full potential, which wasn't for another 300 or 400 years. Goodbye, Mom, my lady, I said, bowing my head slightly. See you in a month. I put the silver circlet on, feeling the magic enter my mind, and then reached out to the direhawk. Our mental connection established, I commanded him to fly and head west. The mighty beast didn't hesitate. He let out a piercing screech and leapt into the air, wings snapping loudly. A thrill raced up my spine as we rose higher and higher, pressure building in my ears, and my lower belly tightening up. The best part of this visit to the Azure Mountains was the trip there. Humans were such wild, wicked beings. So much fun to play with. To paraphrase my mother, I knew better, but I was going to visit human settlements anyway. Humans are just too much fun. Within a few minutes I was hundreds of feet above the endless expanse of forest. Glancing back, I could see the capital's magically grown elfin oaks towering above the rest of the forest. Looking around, I could spot countless elfin towns and villages, their elfin oaks rising high above the forest. Looking across our realm gave me warm, fuzzy feelings inside. Chapter 2. I smiled, biting my lip. The sun was setting in the west, painting the sky orange and pink. It was time to land and make camp. My bird needed to rest and digest the stag we caught hunting a little earlier. I let the direhawk eat it all. I had other plans for dinner. Elfin Oak, my first stop, I muttered, wagging my brows. The human town of Elf Oak was named for the lone elfin oak it surrounded. The huge tree's canopy covered almost the entire town. I could see spots of light as the townspeople lit lanterns. They even had some treehouses in the elfin oak, though they were rather crude constructs compared to elfin treehouses. A patchwork of farms surrounded the town, making the elfin oak stand out even more. I've never been able to find out how they got an elfin oak. They were rare outside of the elfin realms. It would have taken an elf to grow it for them. Spotting the clearing I always stop at, I mentally guided the direhawk down to a landing. I hobbled him, and then ran a long line to a tree so he couldn't fly off. I promised to never build a fire during my overnight camps, so men with evil intent wouldn't be drawn in. The human kingdoms were dangerous places. I didn't bother making camp at all. Really, all I did was unsaddle and bind the bird to the site. Then it was time to have fun. I headed through the thick, virgin forest. Elves are creatures of the forest, so I moved quickly and effortlessly. I emerged from the forest before daylight fully faded into night. As I approached the gate into the city, my insides got all warm and fuzzy. The gate guards were watching me. None of them looked worried. The gate was closed, but I was confident I could get inside. There were only 2 guards outside, when there was usually 10 or more during the day. That would make it so much easier to get inside. Halt and declare yourself, one of the guards said. Hello, Tarl, I said, putting a little more oomph in my walk. I wagged my brows at the 2 men. I knew them both intimately. Hello, Werner. They were both average height, with thick, muscular bodies. They wore mail shirts and blue linen pants. Their conical helmets lay on the ground next to the wall, leaving their dark shoulder-length hair uncovered. Both guards held a long spear and wore a sword. I was unarmed, having left my bow with the saddle. Du Vessa! Tarl cried. Long time no see, girl. Where have you been hiding? In all the wrong places, I said, and we all laughed. I looked at the closed gate, and then at them. I gave them a sexy little lip bit. What's a little elfmaid gotta do to get inside after sunset? I feigned worry as I looked back towards the dark forest with huge eyes. I'm afraid a bear will eat me. I know, Werner said. I've never eaten an elfmaid who wasn't delicious. My breath caught. I remembered last time I visited the town, and Werner crawled up between my legs and ate me out so well. Oh yeah. Werner looked like he was ready to cream his shorts right there, and mine were already wet. Tarl's dark eyes narrowed, filling with lusty hunger. Werner licked his lips, his eyes raking my body over and over. Tarl made an opening motion with his hands. Rolling my eyes, I sighed as if they were trying my patience. Fine. Human men are all dogs. I unlaced my suede shirt, a tiny smile tugging at the corners of my lips as I watched the reaction of the men. More guards gathered atop the wooden palisades, watching with eager eyes. Taking my time, I slowly revealed my deep cleavage, and then my flat belly. Finally, wagging my brows, I pulled the shirt off and let them gaze upon my milky white breasts. I pulled the leather cord tying off my braid, and then shook it loose. Can we keep this strictly oral? I said, fluffing my waist-length, glossy black mane. I'd rather not take off my pants. I'm good with that, Tarl said, dropping his spear and pressing against me. His big, sword-calloused hand cupped my face, tilting it up as he looked at it with awe. My belly really tightened up, and warm wetness spread between my legs. His other hand cupped a boob as his lips claimed mine in a deep, demanding kiss. I pushed into that kiss, clutching desperately at him, feeling so vulnerable and needy. I groaned, out lips sliding all around, tongues dancing deep in my mouth. You are so big and strong. I reached down and grabbed his crotch, finding a stiff bulge. And so, big. Werner moved up close as Tarl's lips released mine and traveled down my neck to my tits. Both hands kneaded my sensitive boobs, as he sucked on a pebbled nipple. The other gate guard grabbed a fistful of hair, yanking my head back. I cried softly. Werner's lips melted into mine, kissing me long and hard. My other hand found Werner's bulge, giving it a firm squeeze. His free hand moved between my legs, and started rubbing me through my pants. My back bowed, body tensing up. The most amazing sensations flowed through me. That man made my pussy sing. Your pants are awful wet and slick, Werner said, sounding rather smug. Maybe I should take them off, I said, voice low and husky. Tarl pushed down on my shoulders, making me kneel before him. My mouth watered, throat tightening up. I felt flushed, so hot, and my hands began to tremble as he quickly unlaced his pants. My hand thrust in, and promptly pulled his erection out. Oh yes, so big and beautiful. Tarl was a stout man, with a stout cock. I kissed the tip, then ran my tongue down the underside to his big, hairy balls. After kissing, licking, and nuzzling his balls, I noticed a bead of precum forming at the tip of his cock. Looking up, I held his eyes with an intense gaze as I slowly plucked that glistening bead off with the tip of my tongue. Rolling my tongue round and round his thick, rubbery cock head, felt his body tensing. And then I went down on him. I groaned, loving how well he filled up my mouth. I bobbed my head a few times, and then cut my eyes toward Werner's crotch. His cock was out, with him stroking it. Let me take care of that. I moved to kneel between them, wrapping a hand around each cock and stroking them both to rock hardness. Kissing and licking Werner's cock, then giving him intense head for a moment, I began alternating between them. I sucked cock until he was at the brink, and then moved to the other man. Back and forth. driving them crazy. Don't stop! Werner cried, palming the back of my head to keep me from pulling off. I giggled, taking him deeper. Sucking harder. Working my tongue. I sucked him off until he erupted in my mouth, bathing my tongue with his sweet seed. Delicious, I purred, giving his cockhead a last kiss before turning to Tarl. I opened wide and removed my hand, taking Tarl all the way in until my lips wrapped around the base of his fat cock. He gasped, clutching at my head, and rose up on his toes. I hummed, and sucked with enthusiasm, and made him come hard in my mouth. I sat back on my legs, licking my lips as I grinned up at the two gate guards. So, was my toll fee acceptable? I said. May I pass into the town? Open the gate. Tarl called. Let this randy little elfmaid in. Ha! I cried, rising to my feet. I picked up my shirt and started putting it back on. You call me Randy, you naughty boys? He calls you Randy, I call you beautiful, Werner said, winking. That's why you're my favorite, I purred, tracing his strong jaw with a finger. The gate slowly swung open. One brow rose, seeing parallel lines of grinning guards. I shook my head. My butt was already starting to tingle. I don't know why I was surprised, since they did this crap every time I visited. Oh my, do I have to run the spanky hand gauntlet again? Always, Tarl said, chuckling. Of course, if I was your favorite then you might be allowed to bypass it. I gave him a curious look, and then glanced at the waiting gauntlet of horny men. I wagged my brows and started walking towards the twin lines. Sorry, Tarl, but naughty girls need spankings, I said. I wiggled my butt as I walked between those 12 men, 6 on a side. As I passed, hands rose up, and then swung down. Thwack! A-A-I-I-E-E. Thwack! Oh! Thwack! Oh! Thwack! Thwack! And so it went, all the way to the end. My butt was stinging like crazy by the time I passed through into the town. The guards laughed and joked, while I blew kisses back at them and continued to my favorite tavern. The wily fox looked rowdier than normal. I heard the tavern before I turned the corner and spotted it. It looked unique within that town of half-timbered buildings. Most homes were 2 stories, with gray-weathered wooden shingles. Many had stone-walled ground floors, with the second floor timber and wattle. The wily fox was a log building of 2 levels, with the owner's quarters on a 3rd level at one end. It had a long porch out front, with drunken men sprawled haphazardly along its length. 2 local women were fighting out front, with a small crowd egging them on. I shook my head woefully. Elfin women didn't make spectacles of themselves like that. We kicked each other's ass in private, away from the eyes of our men. Vesa, one of my friends, called. Where you been hiding, girl? Under prettier men than you, Rab, I said. He laughed and handed me his mug. I sucked it down in one gulp. I love beer. We didn't drink bin in the elfin realms. Elves drank wine, and finely distilled sipping whiskey. Beer was the drink of the rabble, humans, goblins, orcs, and their ilk. Like casual sex with human men, beer was forbidden pleasure I loved way too much. Am I pretty enough to lay on top of you yet? Rab asked. If I'm buying, I'll need at least 12 mugs, I said, winking. If you're buying, may 2 or 3. Rab laughed, sweeping me up in a big hug. My shirt was untied down to my belly button, so he took the opportunity to bury his face in my cleavage, and then rub it all over my boobs. I laughed and wrapped my legs around him, loving the feel of his beard scraping across my satiny smooth skin. Elfin men didn't grow facial hair. I found beards fascinating and delightfully tickly. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I threw my arms behind his neck, pulled him down, and kissed him. His hands were all over my tits and ass, getting me all riled up. Then he slipped me some tongue. Okay, just one more mug and you can have me, I said, giving his crotch a squeeze. He threw me over his shoulder and headed inside. If you rent me a room, you can have me right now. Most of the time my friends there just had their way with me on one of the tables, or on the front porch. I'd end up sleeping on the floor, and then waking up with a stiff back. I wanted a bed for once. Rab was drunk and horny enough to pay for it. He carried me over his shoulder up the stairs. Half the fun was the fear he'd prove too drunk and fall back down, taking me with him. Before I knew it, Rab was throwing me on a bed and ripping at his own clothes. Yeah, baby, yeah, I cried, stripping even faster than the human male. Are all elfmaids as beautiful as you? Rab asked. He always asked me that. You're the most beautiful creature I've ever seen. Really? I said, a tingle riding up my spine. Yeah, I always fell for that line. I'm just average back home. Average gorgeous, he murmured and buried his face between my legs. Oh, hello, I gasped, back bowing as he nuzzled, kissed, and nibbled on my nether lips. Rab worked my hot, glistening folds over like a master. I felt my sex swell and blossom, aching so sweetly. His tongue plowed into me, lapping hungrily at my flowing honey. Oh Rab, yes. The gate guards got my body humming, and Rab swooped in for the mercy stroke. Oh yes, that strong tongue stroked me just right. The sweetest sensations rippled through me, and when he finally sucked hard on my hard little bud down there. Glory! Aga! Yes, I cried, body erupting with pure pleasure. Oh! Rab didn't hesitate. It was his thing. He always brought me to climax, and that's when he mounted me properly. My sex got so tight during orgasm, so it felt divine when he thrust his big cock deep inside me. Ah. I grunted with each stroke. Gods of love and glory. Rab pounded down into me. He was like a madman. He was my wild and hairy barbarian of love and delight. I clutched at his body, my legs wrapped tightly around him as the craziest sensations spiraled through me. Every thrust spread me so wide, making me gasp and cry out. As he became more and more frantic, my mind spun faster and faster. My gods, I gasped, ice huge. My body changed. I felt it rising, surging up into glory. Squeezing my vagina as hard as I could, I made Rab cry out as my insides erupted with insane orgasmic pleasure. Yes. I felt his cock swell and flood my love canal. Yes. Give it all to me. He continued to thrust into me, slower and slower, all the way through my orgasm. It was wonderful. It was the best I'd ever had, but then I thought that about every climax. Oh, wow, Rab. The gods be smiling, ... Give me a moment, and I'll do it again, he said, grinning as we both huffed and puffed. I have a better idea, I said, sitting up and throwing my legs over the side. Let's go downstairs and get drunk. Then we'll do it twice. 3 times? Deal. Asterisk. I sat straight up and looked around. Damn, I muttered, rubbing my brow. My head felt so thick. Then I noticed I was naked. And sticky. Nasty. I looked around again, scowling. I had a room, and still slept on the floor. Naked men were all around me, and 2 other naked women. At least this time I wasn't the only woman taking care of the men. I have to go, I said, struggling to my feet. It took some effort, but I found my clothes scattered from one end of the common room to the other. After dressing, I found a few mugs with a little beer remaining, and drained them. Hair of the dog and all. At least this time I'm getting out of here before noon. The sun was just starting to light the sky. The city gate was open by the time I reached it, so I didn't have to pay the toll again. Saved some time, but the guards kind of looked disappointed. Better luck next time, dogs. I said as I strode out. By the time I reached the spot the trade road entered the surrounding forest, I'd shaking away my drunken debauchery of the previous night. I felt pretty good as I left the road and crept into the thick forest. Soon I was running, stretching my muscles. The forest was an elf's natural habitat. I was grinning ear to ear, already planning out exactly what time I had to depart the Azure Mountains to ensure I had to overnight in Elfin Oak was my return trip. Oh no, I cried, heart dropping into my stomach. As soon as I stepped into the clearing where I left my direhawk, I knew I was in trouble. Major trouble. The clearing was empty. Fuck me to tears. I ran over to where I left the bird. The rope I secured him to a tree with was gone. Not broken. Gone. Some bastard stole my direhawk. Like Elfin Oaks, it took an elf to grow a direhawk. In the human world they were priceless. The elves didn't sell very many. And since they were one and all infertile, the only other way for a human to get a direhawk was to steal it. The thief's footprints were all around where I left the bird. All I could find was just the one set of footprints, so it wasn't a military patrol. He wore boots, and had large feet. So, a big man. I followed his footprints around, and he circled the clearing, weaving in and out of the woodline. Looking for me? These prints are pretty fresh, I said, looking up and around. Finding the tallest tree, I centered myself. Looking up to the highest branch that would bear my weight, I willed myself up there. The magic flowed through me, both hot and cold. At my stage of learning, it wasn't a pleasant sensation. By the time I reached my full power, I understood it would feel almost too good. I lifted off the ground, rising slowly to the desired limb. Holding tight, I looked around and saw only clear blue sky. Lowering my gaze to the western horizon, I saw Elfin Oak. For a second I thought I saw the flapping of huge wings near their Elfin Oak. I blinked and looked again, but saw nothing. Looking east, my face heated up. I had to walk home. Talk about a walk of shame. I would be humiliated. No one from the Emerald Forest had lost a direhawk in 3 centuries. They would discover my little adventures in the human kingdoms, since I wasn't in camp to defend my mount. My life is over. I might as well get married and start popping out babies, I said, hanging my head. Then I had a thought. Elfin Oak was the closest town. Maybe someone there knows something. I glanced back towards the human town. There was that brief blur of wings, though probably my imagination. It's worth a try. Anything was better than returning home on foot, and then explaining to the authorities and my mother why my direhawk was left unprotected. Yeah, that was going to be fun. I'd probably lose command of my direhawk squadron, too. So Elfin Oak, here I come. I leapt off the limb, even as I caught myself in midair, and willed a slow descent. Yeah, my natural elfin magic was good, I just wished I wasn't a one-trick pony. Chapter 3. I never really spent any time in Elfin Oak during the day. I liked to come in at dusk, play all night with the bad boys and girls, and then leave as soon as I woke up. I felt a little lost as I wandered through the twisting streets in broad daylight. Everyone did double takes. Despite being just a few days' walk from the Emerald Forest, elves were not a common sight on the streets of Elfin Oaks. Since I didn't want any hassles, I pulled my hair back in a ponytail, displaying my pointed ears. Most common humans deferred to elves, thinking them all noble for some strange reason. I wasn't going to argue with them. Vessa. Rab called. Dovessa. Stop calling me Vessa, I said, shaking my head with a grin. It was so hard to be angry with him. Don't make me hit you. He rushed up and lifted me in a big hug. Loved it when he did that, but I was a bit distracted. Ha ha. You're funny, he said, finally setting me down. I guess he noticed my lack of joy. I ain't never seen you here in daylight. I was starting think you were a vampire or something, but I didn't know what to tell him. dire hawks were worth more than he probably earned in 5 years. I didn't need a bunch of humans out looking for my bird. At best, they'd demand a reward that I didn't have. I needed to find my stolen bird, steal it back, and continue on as if nothing happened. I'm expecting a friend to stop here and meet me, I said, looking up and around. He'll be riding a dire hawk. You haven't seen anyone coming in on one, have you? Actually, yes, he said, scratching at his beard. Is your friend one of the warlord's men? My heart skipped a beat. I glanced north, towards Castle Kraken 2 days' walk away. He was no friend of the Emerald Forest, and he already had 3 direhawks on which his men sometimes rode to scout out elfin army positions. Count Uric had royal ambitions. For the last 5 years, Uric made it known he would pay well for any direhawk. Even if the man with her bird wasn't one of Uric's men, then that would be the logical place to take a stolen direhawk. Uric would pay more than anyone else for one. I was kind of hoping to keep that information quiet, if you know what I mean, I said, and he nodded. I looked around, making sure no one else was close enough to listen in, before lowering my voice. Where is he right now? Gone, Rab said. He just stopped to feed and water the bird, and then flew away. All I could do was stare at him for a moment. It just got worse and worse. Looking north, I considered all I knew of Castle Kraken and its lord. There was a small village, but not nearly enough women to go around. His men had reputations for being rather wild, and very demanding of women. Could be interesting. How long was he here? Hour. Oh, that makes me so. Thank you, I said. It was so hard to maintain my deception while my head spun with the ramifications of my actions. What I planned to do scared me even more, but I was not going home without that direhawk. One more question. Where can I buy a fast horse? Asterisk asterisk. Castle Kraken sprawled atop a low peak, at the edge of a cliff. It guarded 2 trade roads, collecting tolls and taxes. It was an ugly castle, a few months past the need for another whitewashing. I could see sunlight glinting off numerous helmets and spear points atop its ramparts. The gatehouse was guarded by 20 men-at-arms. One tall, especially massive tower held my attention. It looked like a giant stone birdhouse, with large round openings on the east and west sides. From my angle, I could see into the eastern entrances. Every one of them had a dire hawk roosting within. How many dire hawks does he have? My mother's generals would want to know that information. That tower would hold 8 birds. 8 dire hawks was twice as many as we thought he had. The village below the castle was larger than I expected, but still not that large. I suspected there were more soldiers and subjects living in Uric's castle than there were people in the village. It was a big castle. I dug my heels into the horse's side. She headed down the road, dipping into the valley. I'm afraid I rode her a little too hard, desperate to reach Castle Kraken before sundown. I rode horses all my life, but not anywhere close to what a human noble would spend in the saddle. Suffice to say, my ass was hurting. I was just as happy to see that village as the horse. The village had no walls. Really, it was barely a village, though it had 50 or more structures. The 4 largest structures looked like inns, but turned out to be brothels. After finding the village's lone stables, I paid my fee and tended my mount. Boy, I said to the stable hand. He was no child, but a gray-bearded man. Humans just always called stable hands boy. I don't know why. Where can I find a room for the night? He bowed to me before answering. Common-born humans did that a lot when dealing with nobles and elves. He pointed at the stall I just left my horse inside. You paid for the stall, Lady Elf, he said. No, a room. He frowned, gnawing on the inside of his cheek. We ain't got no ends or such, Lady Elf. The brothels will rent you a room, if you don't mind what they're doing in the other rooms. None of the taverns have rooms for rent? Ain't got no taverns here, just the 4 brothels, he said. They sell good beer. Cheap too. I bet it is, I said, and sighed. Thank you. The stables was close to one of the brothels. The Sweet Maidens was 3 levels of human debauchery. Normally, I rather enjoyed a little wickedness, but I have bigger concerns at the moment. Yet, it was the closest structure to the castle. A good place to study it. I have to get inside that castle, one way or another. Chapter 4. The Sweet Maiden's common room was dead. There were a good 30 girls, some actually kind of pretty, but no patrons. A few tried to engage me, but I didn't swing that way. Okay, with enough beer in me I would swing that way in a threesome. I didn't plan to drink that much. The owner, a tall, lanky half-orc named Or, cast constant looks my way. I paid for a room, but I wasn't hiring a girl or drinking enough in his mind. I'm pretty sure he'd make me leave if there were any paying customers. You ready for another beer, sweetie? A pretty redhead said. Sit. Let's talk, I said. You hiring me? She said, perking up. You wanna go upstairs for some privacy? My name is Vicky. Not yet, I said, and tossed a few coins on the table. About twice what she could expect a man to pay for her intimate services. This is my first time here, and I have to admit I am flabbergasted. Oh? Yes, I've noticed very few women in the village who don't work at one of the brothels, I said. Yet, I've been sitting here almost an hour and only one man has come in to hire a girl. Vicky laughed. Yes, it does look odd, doesn't it? She sighed, glancing at the door and licked her lips. Once a week the warlord hires all of the girls in all 4 brothels to treat his soldiers to a drunken orgy. Everyone knows we'll all be leaving for the castle soon, so the men who would normally be here aren't bothering to come over. I couldn't breathe for a dozen heartbeats. And those were hard, painful heartbeats, too. My insides got hot and mushy, and warm wetness spread between my legs. I wanted to tell myself this was not the opportunity one was looking for to enter the castle. There had to be a better way. But then, who would suspect a hooker? So, this is a tough night for the girls, I said, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. Vicky's left brow rose slight, and her eyes dropped to my trembling hands. I picked up my mug to give my hands something to do. I suspect you earn good coin, but is it worth it? A knowing smile tugged at the corners of her full lips. Very good money. I'll earn as much tonight as I do all week, Vicky said. Count Uric pays us each a night's earnings, plus the men usually give us trinkets and more coin. She leaned over, lowering her voice. You do have enough to pay for your room and board, right? I frowned. Or made me pay in advance, so yes. I looked around nervously, rubbing my lips together. I lowered my voice. I have a long way to go, and I'll have to pick up money along the way. My heart really started hammering. As wicked as I could be while playing in the human kingdoms, I'd never resorted to prostitution. Do you think the warlord would hire me, too? Vicky laughed, leaning back in her chair. She crossed her legs and looked me over critically. You're pretty enough. Hell, fix your hair and put some cosmetics on you, and you'll be gorgeous. Men like elves, too. Or would hire you. I don't want to work here, I just want to work for the warlord where I can earn some really good money, I said. Vicky shrugged. Doesn't matter. Count Uric doesn't hire individual girls. He pays the brothels, who then pay us. You want to play for pay in the castle tonight, then you'll have to work for Or. No other way? None. Vicky leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She held my eyes. Before he'll hire you, or we'll fuck you. Half-orc love fucking elves as much as full-blooded orcs. That gave me a chill. Orcs hated elves above all others. Why do I suspect you'll enjoy him fucking me almost as much as Or? She smiled brightly. You are very bright, my pretty. shall I tell or you want to hire on? I glanced at the door, then over at Orr. He was busy washing mugs behind the bar. Orr was one but ugly man. He looked more human than orc, but his strong jaw jutted a little too far out. His lower fangs barely showed above his lips. His eyes were fierce and dark like an orc's. The half-orc's long, dark hair was slicked straight back. Yes, I said, palming the coin purse hanging off my belt, trying to keep up the ruse. Let's do it. Vicky grinned with wicked glee, stepped past me and led the way to the bar. Her sharp stilettos clattered on the rough hardwood floor. My soft-soled tread silent in contrast. I looked at the other girls. They were all dressed much the same, in diaphanous dancing silks and sky-high heels. Their outfits left little to the imagination. I would soon be wearing one of those sexy, barely their outfits. Or glanced up at our approach, and then did a double-take. His eyes locked on me, and narrowed. Is there a problem with the Elfmaid? Or said, scowling. No, Vicky said. She wants to work here. Or, more specifically, she wants to work one night to get her share of the warlord's deep purse. I'm not interested in doing her any favors, he said, starting to turn away. You won't be, I said. You will profit handsomely. Think about it, or, Vicky said, leaning over the bar. You'll get to whore out a high and mighty Elfmaid. For one night, she will be your girl, to do with as you see fit. She paused, slanted a wicked look back at me. And, of course, you'll have to ensure she's skilled in bed before you decide to hire her or not. I assure you, I'm quite skilled in bed, I said, noticing his interest suddenly piqued. It would be my rotten luck to fuck him for the job, and then he refuses to hire me afterwards. I have a lot of experience. Or pulled his dirty apron off, wadding it up and tossing it on the floor. I'll be the judge of that, Elfmaid, or said, grinning lecherously. Come with me. I sighed, and stepped on Vicky's toes as I followed him. Up close, I could smell his orc blood. Every sentient race had a distinct scent. He was tall, but not as tall as a full orc. Still, he towered over me. Or led me to a door at the end of the bar. Inside was a dressing room for the girls. There were several piles of dancing silks, in numerous styles. On the other side of the room was a pile of high heels. There was a single mirror, with several lanterns burning to either side. Cosmetics were spread across the vanity before the mirror. Strip, he said. I did as ordered, and quickly shed my clothes. Or grabbed me before I could pick out anything to wear. He shoved me against the wall next to the pile of shoes, hands all over my tits, lips claiming mine in a demanding kiss. Ugh, I grunted into his mouth. He opened my mouth with his, thrusting his tongue deep. My tongue sought him out, taunting and teasing. I threw one leg around him, reaching down to grab his crotch. I desperately wanted to take control. Oh baby, slow down. We can take our time and do it right, . He yanked my hair back, sending pain shooting through my neck. No. No time. I'm going to fuck you hard and fast, and if you can keep up, you have a job. Or wrapped his thick arms around my waist, burying his face between my tits. He kissed and nibbled, licked and sucked on my milky pear. My insides were a hot mess, pussy throbbing. I squeaked and squirmed in his arms, clutching at him as he sucked hard on my pebbled nipples. The most amazing jolts of pleasure ripped through me, straight into my aching sex. Suddenly, all I wanted was for him to mount me. I needed him inside me. Take me, I gasped out. Then louder, please, take me. The brothel owner growled, and released me. For a second I stood there wobbling, trying to figure out why he stopped. I got my answer soon enough. Or pushed down on my shoulders, and I knelt before him. He arched a brow down at me, and I nodded. Anything you want, baby, I said. Untying his pants, I pulled them down past his knees. His cock sprang up, slapping me in the face. It was easily the longest, thickest I'd ever seen. I gawked at his erection a second, wondering if I'd made a really bad mistake. "Oh, that's going to hurt." "Yes," he said, chuckling darkly. "It will. Now suck it like a whore, Elfmaid. Make it pretty. Make me believe you love doing it." Wrapping both hands around his thick shaft, I stroked him firmly. At the same time, I kissed and licked its large, purple cock head. Then I licked all the way down one side, and back up the other. He palmed the back of my head, and I knew it was time. Opening wide, I went down on him. "That feels good," or whispered. "You look good sucking my cock." Was all I could say, with a mouth overflowing with half-orc cock. I worked my tongue, sucking hard while stroking the lower shaft. I put all I had into it, trying to make him come. The faster the better. I had something to prove. If I could make this bastard come quickly, a man who dedicated his life to dominating and exploiting women, then I proved my ability too well for him to refuse to hire me. His cock swelled. His breath caught, and he started pulling back. I held tight, one hand wrapping around his large, sweaty balls. I squeezed, sucked, and even hummed. Or cried out. Hot, viscous cum slathered my tongue. I pulled back, a thick rope of cum stretching between my lips and his cock. I held his eyes, letting him soak in his victory over me, and he shot another wad between my eyes, and then another across my nose. I moaned, rolling my tongue as I sucked, going back down on him and swallowing all of his hot, sticky seed. "So, do I have a job?" Or stared down at me a moment, breathing heavily. Finally, he nodded and grinned. The half-orc lifted me up, and slammed me back against the wall. He pressed in tight, lifting my left knee. His cock was still rock hard, and felt hot laying across my belly. As my knee lifted, I felt my sex profoundly. A hot knot formed, and my folds tingled and swelled, blossoming open for him. Or grabbed his cock and swirled the head around my nether lips, driving me crazy. "Please," I begged. Thrusting my hips forward, I watched his face and eyes trying to understand what he wanted. I knew what I wanted, what I needed. "I'm yours. Please, take me." There was nothing sweet about Or's grin. It was lusty. It was lecherous. It was vicious. Just like the brothel owner, the stinking pimp, he was. My pimp. Or thrust hard and deep. "Ah!" I cried, back bowing, and both legs wrapping around him. I knew he was big. His was the biggest cock I'd ever known. Inside me, though, it felt monstrous. That long, fat bastard stretched my little hole out to the max, and just a little beyond. "You like my bitch tamer, don't you, Elfmaid?" The half-orc pulled almost out, and then thrust in even deeper. Yes. "So big," I groaned out. "Hurts." "So good." My new pimp pounded into me like a madman. Even as massive as he was, Or fully sheathed himself inside me with a few thrusts, and that's when he went to town. My body reacted profoundly from the first thrust. The most amazing sensations rippled through me, and I quickly began building towards release. Ugh! Ugh! I cried out with every thrust. Yes! Ugh! Yes! A movement at the corner of my eye caught my attention. Vicky was watching through the open door, a look of malicious satisfaction on her pretty face. I so wanted to slap that smug smile off her face. I felt it then, and forgot all about Vicky. It started as a stirring within, deep in my vagina. I clamped down around him, back bowing, and legs tightening. Then that heady rush began, and my body surged towards climax. Every deep thrust pushed me closer and closer, and he thrust even faster. Aga! I cried. Intense pleasure ripped through me. I bucked and writhed, barely a thought in my head. It was the best ever. Aga! Or growled and thrust harder, faster, deeper. He forced me to come again, and again. I thought he melted my brain. My whole body ached from the pleasure, and the need for more. And then he just stopped, pulled out, and let me fall on my ass. I leaned back against the wall, huffing and puffing, looking up at him towering over me. So big. So strong. So damned wonderful at fucking. I'm going to charge them double for you tonight, he said. My head was spinning, belly quivering. It took a moment before I could think and understand what he said. So I'll get twice as much? No, I will. You'll be paid the same as the other girls, he said. Or stepped back, tucked his semi-flaccid cock back into his pants and then pointed at the pile of shoes. Pick out a pair that fits. I'll find you something to wear. I watched him go over to the piles of dancing silks. Licking my lips, wondering if I'd ever get the taste of him out of my mouth, I actually felt rather accomplished. Oddly enough, his cum tasted better than any I've ever enjoyed. And his cock was the best ever. Seeing him pick out a skimpy red halter, I turned to the shoes and found a pair of sky-high red stilettos. Putting them on, I gathered up my flying leathers. Walking over to him, I listened to the song of my shoes, clacking sexily on the floor. Heels changed everything about me, from how I felt about myself to how my body moved when I walked. I liked it. A lot. Some of my friends thought I liked it too much. Or barely gave the shoes a look. Put this one, paint your face, and clean up. Hurry. The half-orc laughed. It was oddly irritating how he just walked away from me after all we'd just done together. Cold-hearted bastard. He couldn't even give me a little hug and kiss before going? Stupid pimp, I muttered, slipping into the red silk halter. It was beyond skimpy. Elves invented skimpy and sexy. Hey, we invented stiletto heels. So we know sexy. Humans, though, had a knack for pushing sexy to the limits. That wisp of a halter cupped my boobs, displaying them beautifully, but was mostly under my tits. It barely covered my nipples, and I wasn't sure I could even walk without bouncing out of it. I wonder if he'll let me keep it. The skirt wasn't really. All it consisted of was 2 narrow strips of diaphanous red silk, front and back, tied at my hips. It really didn't cover anything. The skirt just made me feel more naked. After putting on cosmetics and then pulling my hair back in a bouncy ponytail, I looked over the selection of jewelry. Everything was overly big, tawdry, and cheap. Mostly, it was painted wood. I put on a red bracelet and matching hoop earrings. Big hoops. I'd never worn wooden jewelry before. Kinda liked it. It made me feel cheap and easy, like a real prostitute. Hey, lazy girl, it's time to go, Vicky said. She stood in the door, looking me over. The scowl on her face made me feel all tingly inside. Come on. Time to sell your sweet elfin ass to men. Chapter 5. It was prostitutes on parade. Or let us out onto the street. The other brothel owners and their girls were walking by, heading for the castle. Villagers stood on either side of the narrow, winding street and watched with hungry eyes. The girls all wore their skimpiest, sexiest outfits. Each brothel had a distinct manner of dress. We fell in at the end, following the other 3 brothels up to the castle gates. I did my best to flirt with the guards, while studying the layout and defenses of the castle. Once inside the curtain walls, I got a much better idea of what I was up against. The main keep was just inside the gate, with the Eyrie Tower to its east. Despite how it looked outside the castle, the Eyrie Tower was not taller than the main keep. The Eyrie was on a rise, making it look taller. The Eyrie had only 4 levels for direhawks, with a ground level or 5 altogether. Each level was tall enough to hold a direhawk. The prostitutes filed straight into the keep, which I assumed had the Great Hall and Count Urik's residence. Spirited music drifted out of the keep. The main door was on the first floor, or one level up from the ground floor. A wooden stairs and deck gave access to the entrance. The only windows were on the top 2 floors, and so it made it hard to estimate the number of floors. My best estimate was 8 levels, not counting the roof. I saw 2 barracks, a smithy, and several stables lining the inside of the curtain walls. There were 2 wells within sight, and I suspected another deep under the keep. I didn't see much to hide behind if caught out in the bailey later. The guards on the curtain walls could see down easily enough. I didn't see any guards stationed at the area, or anywhere but the gate and catwalks. All total, maybe 20 men patrolling on the catwalks. I figured most of the gate guards would join us in the keep once the gates were closed. I sighed in relief to find no patrols in the bailey. Just from the few minutes I had between the gate and the keep, I noticed the Eyrie Tower was much newer construction. It was built of the native sandstone, while the rest of the castle was dark gray granite. That fact didn't help me, since all of the stone was dressed smooth to keep anyone from climbing up the side. Nightfall was an hour away, with a mostly cloudy sky. Once it was dark, I could sneak between the towers. Until then, I would entertain the warlord's troops. Oddly enough, the closer I got to the keep's door, the tighter my lower belly became. The swing of my hips became more exaggerated, and my stride made my boobs jostle more. My body, at least, was getting ready for the party about to happen between my thighs. An Elfmaid, the guard at the door, said. I stopped as he reached out. His hand cupped the back of my head, and his thumb rubbed the tip of my ear. His other hand squeezed my tits. You're a little skinny, but I'm going to tap your ass, Elfmaid. I'll never understand humans' fascination with pointed ears. Maybe it was because every race in the known world had pointed ears, except humans and dwarves. That said, I wore my hair in a ponytail to display my ears, knowing it would excite the men. I graced him with a sexy lip bite and lowered my eyes submissively. I'll make it best you ever had, master. The door opened into the great hall. There were at least 150 prostitutes, but twice that many soldiers. With more soldiers outside. 2 to 1 wasn't as bad as I feared. It was doable, though I was sure each guy would take several girls during the course of the night. The infamous warlord, Count Urik of Kraken, sat upon a throne across the room. I'd never seen him before, or heard him described, but thought of him as an elderly, hairy, but ugly man. Imagine my surprise to discover he was none of that. Urik looked to be mid-30s, with long dark hair and brown eyes. Instead of a full beard, he had a neatly trimmed mustache and goatee. He looked like a warrior in his prime. Maybe I should introduce myself to our host, I whispered. There were 4 long trestle tables set up in the great hall. Each would seat about 100, so with the men and women combined seating was scarce. I started walking between the 2 innermost tables, eyes locked on the warlord. After all, I had an hour or so to kill, might as well do it with the biggest, baddest, sexiest man of them all. Hey, an Elfmaid, a soldier said to my left. He grabbed my wrist and yanked me into his lap. His big, calloused hands were all over my body in a heartbeat. She's mine. Ag! I cried, feeling my halter pulled off. He palmed the back of my head, pulling me down into a deep, demanding kiss. It took a while, but I finally broke free of his kiss. He lowered his face to my tits, kissing, licking, nibbling. His hands roamed my body, mostly squeezing my butt and tits. Oh, I said, head spinning. I glanced at Urik on his throne. 2 naked blondes were rubbing their bodies against him, taking turns kissing him. So I turned back to the man who'd claimed me. What's your name, big boy? I'm O. Don't pinch so hard. I'm Duvessa. I'm Micken, he said. I was straddling his lap, my knees on a hard bench. The bulge between Micken's legs rubbed against my pussy, sending the sweetest sensations spiraling through me. His hands mauled my naked tits. There was nothing gentle or sensuous about that fondling. And then he started pinching my nipples, really hard. "Oh baby, slow down," I said. "We have all night. You don't want to spend yourself too soon." "Not a problem," Micken said. He tapped a piece of jade jewelry hanging on a leather cord around his neck. My eyes widened, seeing that it was a divine penis, which was a common talisman to give the wearer greater endurance. With that around his neck, he could fuck me all night long. "Let's get started." Someone behind me tugged the knot on my left hip loose, releasing my skirt to fall away. Then a delicate, feminine finger thrust up my butt. "Oh!" I cried, looking back over my shoulder. "Surprise," Vicky said. The pretty redhead cupped my chin and kissed me. She distracted me so I didn't notice Micken pull out his cock. I noticed it when he pressed the head to my hot, wet folds. And then he thrust up into me. "Ah!" I grunted into Vicky's mouth. He grabbed my hips and really started thrusting hard and fast into me. Every thrust pulled a grunt out of me. Ugh! 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 My body and libido hadn't recovered from what or did to me back at the Sweet Maidens. My insides melted, singing sensually as he filled me up over and over. Vicky's added a finger up my butt, and I realized she had a plan. "Oh no," I moaned low when she surrendered my lips and motioned another man over. The new man pulled my head back by my hair and kissed me. I could feel Vicky unfastening his pants. Then she was stroking him cock. Finally, the redhead guided him to my butt. "Push," Vicky said. "Ugh!" I cried, my butthole sudden stretched past the point of pain. "Aaiee. Ha! Take that, you stuck-up old elf," Vicky snarled, face just inches from mine. I punched her in the nose. The two men fucking me laughed, but never missed a beat. By this time Micken was fully sheathed inside me, happily fucking my pussy like a wild man. The soldier up my ass was bigger than Micken, in every way imaginable. He was still working his way deeper with powerful thrusts. Those two cocks sliding in and out of me, at different rates, was insane. Great gods of love and glory! I cried, eyes huge as I stared at the ceiling. My body erupted with intense pleasure. The best ever. Yeah, I know I think that every time, but this time it truly was the best. Ag. Ag. Asterisk asterisk. The main entrance opened, with a dozen more soldiers filing inside. I looked past them and smiled. It was dark out. Very dark. How long have I been in here? I wondered. Probably several hours. I was on all fours atop a table, facing the door. Another nameless soldier scooted up behind me. His hand came down hard on my right butt cheek. Thwack! Aaiee. Both butt cheeks were bright red from all of the spankings I received that night. Normally, I rather like being spanked. There's a limit. That limit was passed a couple hours back. Thwack. Oh. Baby, be nice, I begged. They liked it when I begged. Don't hurt your baby girl. Ha. Yeah, he said. That didn't sound good. Lay on your belly. Press your legs together. I grimaced, laying there holding onto the edge of the table. He straddled my thighs, and then I felt his knees spread, with his cock pushing down between my stinging butt cheeks. Ah! I grunted as he thrust down into my ass. Ooh-hoo! I clamped down as hard as I could around him. The soldiers sucked in a breath, but kept on thrusting. Lifting my butt higher, and I squeezed over and over, trying to make him come faster. First of all, my bladder was well past full. They'd ignored my pleas to go relieve myself for the past 3 men. I couldn't wait any longer. You're the man. I cried. You're the best. Yeah, he cried, thrusting frantically. I felt him swelling within me. Working my butt the best I could, I pushed him closer and closer. 2 more men were moving up, watching me intently. Damn it, no more. I bit my lip, concentrating on the bastard reaming out my butt. Ah, he cried, and he filled me with his seed. We both moaned and groaned while he spent himself inside me, his thrusts becoming slower and slower as he savored the moment. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing I was about to get some bladder relief. I was off that table the second he pulled out. No! I said. The other 2 soldiers froze, dropping low to catch me if I darted away. I pointed at them, face set in a firm expression. I have to go to the water closet, unless you want me urinating all over you, Dot. They hesitated. One gave me a curt nod, saying, Don't dally. Come back to us, and no one else. Understand? Yes, I said, fidgeting, knees pressed together. Can I go now? He nodded, and I darted for the stairs to the next level. There was only one water closet in the castle, on the next level up. I'd already visited it a few times that night. Thankfully, there was no one occupying it. Of course, there was no door. I sat on the hole, in a stone seat that jutted out over the side of the keep. Urine and cum came out of me in a flood. I squeezed, and more cum came out of my pussy and butt. I've enjoyed more than a few orgies in my time, but I'd never seen anything like what was going on down in the Great Hall. Every single soldier had a divine penis talisman. It was nothing but a damned fuckfest, with the men enjoying as many different women as they could. There was lots of food and beer, too. Drunk men usually had performance issues, but not with a divine penis talisman to help. I was still alone after I finished. There was a wash basin, so I cleaned up with sponge and water while I considered my options. I never thought they'd guard the entry to the keep with the gates closed for the night. In every other human keep I visited, the people in the Great Hall just went outside to relieve themselves. I planned to sneak off during one of those pee breaks, but now I needed a new plan. That meant I either had to go up, and over the top, or finish out the night and try again another day. I rolled my eyes. There was no way I was going back to the orgy. So it was over the top for me. My limited elfin magic would let me jump off the top of the keep without getting hurt. My situation was not ideal. I haven't seen my clothes in hours. All I wore were the stilettos and cheap jewelry. I immediately took the shoes off, massaging my toes while I considered my options for clothes. I couldn't fly naked. It got cold up there. And from what little I knew of Castle Kraken, there were no women living there. Uric only allowed the prostitutes inside once a week. So no women's clothes immediately available. I wonder if I can fly over to the Sweet Maidens, get my clothes inside, and fly off before Uric's soldiers reached me? I thought. The Sweet Maidens' brothel was the closest structure in the village to the castle. The gate guards would see me land there. Probably not. Damn it. The stone stairs spiraled up the keep, hugging the stone walls. The level I was on had a short corridor to the center of the keep, with 2 doors on each side and one on the end. I checked, and they were all storerooms for food and weapons. I grabbed a bow, 2 quivers of arrows, and a short sword. I left them my stilettos in payment. Hey, you know how much a nice pair of women's shoes cost? Heading up the stairs, I must have been a sight. Naked, with a sword belt and bow. Naked battle elf came to mind. I grinned. My mother would not be amused. Yet, in ancient times elfin warriors charged into battle naked to prove their bravery and contempt for their enemies. We've gotten a lot smarter in modern times. I didn't bother checking any of the rooms as I ascended. Those horny bastards in the great room were waiting for me. They'll come looking before long, and when they don't find me all kinds of crazy will happen. I really needed to find my bird and be gone before that happened. The top level, as I suspected, was the warlord's residence. Count Urix divided it up into multiple chambers, including a private water closet with a chamber pot. I started to continue up to the roof, when it occurred to me there would be clothes there. Though I never got close to him, Urix looked to be about 3 times bigger than me. Nothing he wore would come close to fitting. One of his tunics would be like a dress on me, I thought, smiling. It didn't take long to find a short stack of tunics. I chose a blue one. The sword belt cinched it around my waist nicely, with the hemline falling just shy of my knees. I was still barefooted, but it felt good to be clothed again. Angry shouts drifted up from the stairs. The soldiers were constantly getting into loud, drunken fights over the girls. Then again, they might have figured out I was missing. I ran up the last flight of stairs, going through the open hatch. I closed the hatch, but it could only be locked from the inside. Oh well. I wasn't going to stay up there long. Looking up and around, I was pleased to see the sky was mostly cloudy. The moon was obscured at the moment, plunging the castle's bailey in deep darkness. Going to the eastern side, I studied the airy tower a moment, and then turned my attention to the bailey below. And then I saw them. 3 two-man patrols wandering around down there. Plus, there had to be at least 50 men on the curtain wall catwalks. I eased up into the battlements, put an arrow in my bow, and centered myself. As I felt the magic flow through me, I jumped. I caught myself, willing myself to fall slowly. Halfway down, I shot an arrow into the smithy to my left. The arrow ricocheted through the dark shop, making 2 of the patrols turn towards it. As they went to investigate, I set another arrow in my bow. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I shot into an open window of the barracks to my right. While that 3rd patrol hurried over to check out the barracks, I took off running towards the towering eyrie. The door was closed, but not locked. Thankfully it was unguarded. The ground level was the tack room, with 2 lanterns turned down low, and I spotted my saddle right off. I knew they had my bird, I muttered. I was taking one of the direhawks, no matter what. There was no other way out of that castle now. My saddlebags were on a table, the contents pulled out and searched through. Yeah, I didn't like that. Oddly, they ignored the trail rations. I quickly stuffed my clothes back into the large leather bags and threw the saddlebags over my shoulder. I heard shouting men in the bailey. Heart pounding, I raced up to the next level. 2 birds roost there, with the enchanted circlets that controlled each hanging on a peg next to the door into each roost. Neither was mine. So I headed up to the next level. Again, neither was my direhawk. I did go over to the large, round portal for the bird and looked down into the bailey. Holy oaks, I whispered. Soldiers were flooding out of the keep. Shouting men with torches ran around checking every nook and cranny. Then I spotted 2 men running towards the airy entrance. Time's up. Next level up I found him. Yes. Pressing the enchanted circlet down tight around my head, over my hair, I stepped through the door and into the roost. The direhawk was looking out the big round portal at the chaos below. He turned vicious raptor eyes on me, but I felt our mental connection. Let's get you saddled, my pretty, I said. The bird squatted, allowing me to throw the lightweight wood and leather saddle atop him, settling it at the base of his neck. I could ride a direhawk without a saddle, but it was exceedingly dangerous. Having saddled thousands of birds in my life, I got the job done quickly. I could hear the soldiers coming, their boots loud even on the stone steps. Apparently they heard me, because they started shouting. Just before climbing into the saddle, I realized I didn't have my bow. I'd need that if they pursued. Damn it, I growled, heading for the door. It was leaning against the wall, under the circlet's peg. My hand wrapped around it as the 2 human guards reached that level. I hesitated between bow and sword, and they were on me. No! A left cross caught me in the temple, while the other soldier pounded a knee into my belly. I kicked one in the balls, doubling him up, but the other smashed a fist up into my chin, and blackness washed over me as I fell back into the roost. I don't know how long I was out, but when I slowly came around, the two soldiers were holding me upright between them. The direhawk was still squatting, waiting for me. The circlet was laying on the floor, next to my sword and bow. And then the warlord walked in. "So this is the little thief?" Yurik said, looking me up and down with contemptuous eyes. He glanced at the squatting direhawk, saddled and ready to fly. "No one steals my birds." "It's not yours," I said. "He belongs to me. He was stolen by one of your men." "That makes him mine," Yurik said. He walked over to the portal and shouted down, "We caught her. Send the horse home, and everyone go to your battle posts." Yurik returned to me, looking me over with more appreciation. Not for my battle skills, I'm sure. There was a very mercenary glint in his eyes. "So Elfmaid, is there anyone that would pay ransom for you?" "Why? If you'll bring a big ransom, we'll treat you quite well," Yurik said. "A small ransom, you get tossed in a cold cell until it's paid." He wrapped a big, powerful hand around my throat, his thumb pressing painfully into my windpipe. "No ransom, I personally strangled you to death, but..." Big ransom," I said, nodding vigorously. "If you're lying, I'll take it out of your sweet round ass," Yurik said, giving my neck a fierce squeeze. He looked at the two men holding me. "Take her down to the whipping post. I'll personally take care of administering her punishment." "Wait. I thought you were going to treat me well." "After I whip you unconscious," he said, grinning. "You didn't think you'd escape unscarred, did you?" I didn't even think. Terror gripped me. Elves didn't whip criminals, but it was common among humans. I'd seen a man publicly whipped for petty thief. I had nightmares for the next decade. So my reaction was swift and without thought. "No!" I cried. For the first time, I summoned magic without first centering myself and concentrating on it. I just pulled it in, felt its searing heat and cold, and thrust it straight out at Yurik. "Hi!" The warlord cried out as he was hit with unseen magic, and knocked straight back and out of the portal. The soldiers holding me cried out his name, their grips loosening. I twisted almost free, but their grips tightened. So I threw my right leg up and over a soldier's neck, and then forced it straight down while wrapping my leg around it. He released my arm to try and pry my leg loose. I rabbit punched the other soldier. He released me, clutching his brutalized throat as he stumbled back against the wall. Pulling my leg away from the first man, I stepped to the side and spun. My foot slammed into his face, crushing his nose. Then I kicked up high, and brought my heel down at the base of his skull. He grunted and lay still. I paused, realizing I could have killed him. But I saw he was breathing, so rushed over to the circlet and weapons. In less than a dozen heartbeats I was in the direhawk's saddle. "Let's fly," I commanded, aloud and mentally. The direhawk let out a piercing cry that made my ears ache in that enclosed space. He ducked through the portal and hopped onto the tree trunk jutting out from the side of the tower. Before he flew off the roost, I looked down expecting to see Yurik lying in the bailey dead. Instead, I saw him crawling out of a wagon stacked high with hay. "Lucky bastard," I said, shaking my head. My direhawk leapt into the air, his powerful wings snapping loudly. He let out another fierce, predatory cry, and we were off. I turned him southwest, towards the elfin realm of Red Crescent. Just in case they pursued with direhawks. If no one came after me, I turned back toward my real destination, the Azure Mountains to the northwest. Within the hour, I knew there was no pursuit. Humans were not as skilled in direhawk combat as elves, so I suspect Yurik chose to cut his losses. So I turned the bird to the northwest. "That went well," I said, grimacing as I probed the many sore spots about my body. "At least I got well laid before they beat me up." My mind drifted to the luxuries of the Azure Mountains. The boys of that elfin realm were quite frisky. Good times to come. The end. Back to table of contents. Please consider leaving a review on the site where you purchased this story, or comment directly to him via email. You can contact Warren at war_Thomas@outlook.com. Check out these other books by Warren Thomas. The Elfmaid Trilogy. The Elfmaid's Curse. Into Lands Forbidden. Way of the Warrior, coming in February 2015. Elfin Magic. About the author. Warren Thomas is an IT professional by day, and a dreamer by night. While serving a tour of duty with the army in Germany, he found himself in daily contact with castles, cathedrals, and city walls. His imagination erupted, and he's been writing fantasy adventures ever since. Table of Contents. Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Chapter 5. List of other books by Warren. About the author. Back to table of contents.